We've seen this particular subject go around here and there in the sci-fi community lately, and wanting to get a bit more active on this channel, we thought it would be interesting to try this out and potentially work with a few members of the community that have similar interest in both 40k and Star Trek. First and foremost, we want to put out our bias. We are a Star Trek fan. We grew up with Star Trek, and if you've read our Millennium Falcon vs. Enterprise D Nightmare article on Patreon, you'll see that we try to take our versus stuff pretty seriously, at least with the stuff we've seen on screen. That being said, we also don't want anyone to think that we're not going to take 40k at its word and treat it unfairly because we aren't going full Buttermilk Bob on the Borg. We cannot stress enough that we agonize over these sort of silly hypotheticals like most people just wouldn't have the time or energy for, and it takes months to put together solid cases to even make these sort of articles meaningful in the first place. It keeps us up at night, even though it shouldn't. Big thanks to Commissar Gamza for really hammering this idea into our head with his several videos that approach the similar scenarios. While we'd been binging Borg and Star Trek videos for a while, his videos were really the straw that broke the camel's back and made us decide to take it on ourselves. Don't take anything he says too seriously, and we don't necessarily agree with all of his takes, but we can't deny the source of our inspiration, so check him out. With that out of the way, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this opening section of our analysis. We need to deal with the medium and context through which these two settings function. First and foremost, the inter-franchise compromise! Subspace will exist in 40k, and whatever rules Star Trek follows to get the job done will remain intact for the sake of this scenario. We'd like to give everyone their maximum reasonable power for these sort of hypotheticals after all. So, of course, if we were to put the God Emperor of Man into Star Trek, he'd still get all of his psychic powers and warp shenanigans, etc. It's all gravy here. We're flexible and generous in most of our analyses. Some even say we're too generous. That being said, we'll assume that the Borg in this setting come after Voyager, after they've recovered from assimilating the neurolytic pathogen in the final episode, as stated by the Borg Queen before her avatar at the time died. As we have no solid information from Lower Decks on the final situation for the Borg Collective, other than the fact that it's still going strong and Borging on, we'll simply assume that all is well and the status quo has been largely maintained. The upcoming Star Trek Prodigy is not out yet and bound to have some secrets up its sleeves after its first season, so we'll not be taking into account anything in the upcoming Prodigy timeline. And, of course, Picard is doing their own thing with the Borg, and we haven't gotten into that yet, nor are we going to make long-term assumptions on where the Alpha is going to go with that. So let us set the Star Trek date at 2380. That'll keep things simple. We'll try to use as updated information from 40k with the Lexicanum wiki and other sources as we can. We'll assume that it is somewhere in early M42, and Grilliman has taken over as Lord Protector of the Imperium, with Primaris Marines becoming a staple in the Space Marine rosters, and the Sabbat worlds still at constant war and swarming with chaos. That'll be important for later segments in this series. We will not be doing any weird, timey-wimey shenanigans with this scenario because that would drive us crazy. For the sake of things, we'll assume both sides are unable to bring selective, controllable time travel to bear against each other. Next, we'll talk about arrival and placement. The Borg will be entering the 40k universe by way of the Halo stars on the far western edge of the 40k galaxy, just beyond Ultima Macaria. Ultima Macaria lost contact with the Imperium as of 999 M41 due to the fading of the Astronomicon, so we figure this is essentially fair game and we can just take it from there. The beginning invasion force will consist of 10 tactical cubes. Our reasoning for this comes from Voyager Season 4 episode... Oh my god! Holy shit! What is that thing? Oh my fucking god! Holy... Get it! Catch it! Don't let it get away! No! Follow it over there! No! Oh god! Where'd it go? Oh, shit. Huh. Well, it must have just been our imagination. Sorry about that, guys. Moving on. Upon arriving into the 40k universe, the 10 tactical cubes will be explicitly cut off from the collective, as their subspace connections will not be able to breach the great distances they manage to travel between the Star Trek universe and the 40k universe. Starting population, assuming a tactical cube holds roughly 180,000 drones, is 1.8 million Borg drones to start. 7 of 9 in Voyager shows numerous times that even a single drone separated from the collective retains all previously collected and processed information from the collective. So, even if they don't have the sheer numbers, we can assume that these 10 tactical cubes have the effective understanding, knowledge, and capacity to build anything they would have had in their original universe. Cut off from the primary queen, a new Borg queen is fabricated from available drones, and the new Borg collective is established with the same primary goals and directives as the last, with the sole addition of reintegrating with the original collective. The Borg will, in this case, act exactly as they would in the Star Trek universe. They'll be as true to the Alpha as we can make them. While we will try as hard as we can to make our own rulings based off of a lifetime of watching Star Trek and loving the shit out of the Borg, we will also be using the standard Borg combat tactics as a primary reference, as it seems solid enough. As with everything, we have appropriate links in the description that you can go to and find out if you want to see those for yourself. Unable to identify any other species on long-range scanners, the new Borg collective would naturally focus on the Imperium of Man, given their proximity to the Borg's entry site just beyond Ultima Macaria, as well as the vast population, resource pool, and industrial infrastructure already belonging to the Imperium. The fact that species 5618 is the only species in this universe that the new Borg collective recognizes would only encourage this choice. Given their history with the species, the Borg would naturally seek to recoup their numbers with human stock, a species that the Borg already knows is capable, inventive, and easy to assimilate. According to the Lexicanum, there are 32,380 Hive worlds in the Imperium out of over 1 million habitable worlds. At the same time, that same article also establishes that 10 to 25% of all Imperial worlds are Hive worlds, and they have over 1 million worlds, so we know this number must be at least closer to 100,000 Hive worlds. And about 80 to 85% of the worlds inhabited by the Imperium are alleged to have at least one Hive city or Hive city cluster on them. We can believe that easily enough, we suppose. It's a big number of superpopulated worlds, that's what we're getting at. We will assume, in this setting, that being said, that the average Hive city has about 10 billion people, giving that some dude on Reddit did a bunch of math and figured out that if Necromunda's primary city has the population density of Kowloon, it would have at least 13 billion people. This checks out mathematically, and seeing as most Hive cities seem pretty similar in shape and all that, we'll lower it down to 10 billion, to allow for an average and leave it at that for the ease of mathematics. But also don't forget that these numbers can skyrocket considering some other dude did some math about Hive cities potentially having as much as 2 trillion people. Giving long story short, per Hive world, we're dealing with hundreds of billions to potentially dozens of trillions of Imperial lives, and Ecumenopolis worlds would naturally have quadrillions of people. Who even knows what the true population of Holy Terra is? We're gonna say, to be generous to the 40k universe here, that primary psychic attacks that manifest physically can probably ragdoll the average Borg drone just fine and dandy enough, but power swords will eventually find their limits against Borg shields. We have no problems with psychers just telekinetically chucking groups of drones at a time. Just remember that 40k explicitly states that such attacks take energy. A human psyker can only throw drones around for so long before one slips between the cracks and assimilates them. Borg drones cannot be overwhelmed mentally or psychically due to the overwhelming presence of the Borg collective. No single mind could possibly overwhelm the collective on the whole. Furthermore, we're going to say that things like scattering fields can affect psychers and the Tyranid hive mind, as the Borg have shown before that they can use those tools to affect against species with psychic powers in their own universe. We are familiar with the standard claim that Borg are vulnerable to kinetic rounds, aka bullets, and melee attacks. A cursory glance at our play-by-play commentaries on Twitter about Star Trek and our observations watching TNG and Voyager will tell any casual reader that we simply do not subscribe to this line of thinking. We're going to, first and foremost, glance right past the fact that the Tommy gun ammo used to take down the normally referenced drones was hollow ammo, however, because it is readily apparent in the Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2 that Borg drones' personal force fields can easily bounce a charging Klingon and throw him back several feet. Locutus, not even fully altered into a Borg combat drone, was able to overpower numerous individuals, ragdoll a normal human, and throw them over a dozen feet before one-shotting a Klingon. It took the extreme power of Data, an android with physical strength far exceeding the standard human, just to incapacitate one of Locutus's attachments after capture. Furthermore, Starfleet shields have physically stopped entire shuttles at full impulse, bouncing off them with no damage or even affecting shield integrity. It goes without saying, if a Starfleet shield can fully deflect a charging shuttle, and a Borg drone can completely ignore a concentrated Nadion stream that can vaporize a human, that Borg personal shields could withstand a charging batleth-wielding Klingon or whatever. Moreover, a species that specifically only takes the best from whatever species it assimilates would have long seen things like slug throwers become obsolete, especially when we see technologically inferior species using personal force field technology capable of stopping characters like Data, as we see in the episode where Data is collected for being the only Soong-type android in existence. However, we will allow some caveats, considering the content of 40k Universe's most common high-damage weaponry. In regards to physical damage, we're going to say that it's logical to assume that the standard drone only receives so much energy in any given time interval by the collective to power its personal shields, and we can assume that properly physical attacks might cause a bit more drain on the shields given the stubborn nature of solid matter. If melee damage were to drain a shield enough, the collective might cut them off to conserve more power in the long run in a large combat situation. Alternatively, it almost seems intuitive that a Borg cannot interact with items outside of its own personal force field, and so must turn their personal force fields off to, say, inject nanoprobes into a victim. That being said, we have never on camera seen a Borg shield overload. We've only seen them circumvented using what amounts to technological trickery, so this is a very serious exception and we won't be calling upon it often. We will assume, for the sake of power consumption in this hypothesis, that adapting to a damage source means that the personal shield requires less and less power to cancel out the incoming attacks in any given attack, eventually bottoming out to negligent power consumption such that an individual Borg drone will never have their personal shield cut off from the collective to conserve power, provided it only receives attacks from the same damage source, i.e. a lasgun, bolter, chain, sword, etc. This would explain why adaptation takes time. It will also be important later. Explosions! It's fair to assume that while a Borg personal shield will quickly adapt to high explosives, the floors and walls will not. Consistently, Borg drones are seen buried under debris or thrown from their places when the ground gives way under them. Since things like bolters absolutely take huge chunks of the environment with them, we're more than willing to accept that these types of damage would consistently do some format of damage to a large group of enemies. Borg drones are not. Even Borg need a structure to stand on at least as far as every on-screen showing we've got tells us. Therefore, while the average Borg drone might be able to survive big explosions and even quickly to adapt to them, we are not going to say that huge ordnance will ever be completely ineffective so long as combat takes place in a destructible environment. After all, 40k is really good at big booms. There's no need to nerf that. Furthermore, on the side of 40k, we're going to give the kinetic weapons roughly the same sort of general edge as melee combat. If the personal shield energy cap holds true, which we'll assume for the sake of this series, at least at the early stages of the invasion, then the inherent unyielding nature of solid matter might make adapting to it subtly more difficult than particle beams, lasers, and more standard energy weapons from Star Trek. While this is not at all a huge alteration from the upcoming script on the part of the 40k universe, we're going to seriously consider this when dealing with more high-powered engagements between the Borg and 40k factions. After all, big bullets take out big parts of the environment as well, and pockmarked battlefields are not something that serve the Borg's comparably poor on-screen dexterity. Finally, the 40k universe has some extremely nightmarish weapons and materials that, while exceedingly rare and hardly a serious threat in the large-scale scenario like this, we still want to include for the sake of clarity in covering our options. We're going to try to do this quick. While none of them are something that stops the Borg, we want to give credit where it's due. We're going to say dimensional phase weapons will have a strong inherent advantage on the Borg for a while, but the moment they actually get their hands on any such weapons, it's game over. The moment a Catan blade that tears you apart on a dimensional level, or an Eldar gun that shoots you when the soul is captured by the Borg, they'll quickly deliver it back to the collective and reverse engineer it for, at minimum, complete immunity. We gather most mainstream top-level Imperial battleships have hard-lined analog self-destruct systems. For this scenario, we'll assume that this is the case, just to be generous. As such, it would be possible to avoid most assimilation attempts via boarding simply by blowing the ship. Given the stalwart nature of the Imperial Navy, this may even become common. This will be strongly accounted for in the final scenario. Many hard Exterminatus weapons take the form of gigantic hyperbeam weapons that collapse a planet from the inside out, missiles that literally open portals to hell to swallow you up, and firestorms that melt the surface of the planet with the heat of 1,000 suns. These weapons, while extremely rare, especially considering how often we see them, can only nuke 2 or 3 cubes completely out of existence before the collective finds a way to circumvent it. They're no stranger to total annihilation weaponry, so we're following the Crusher protocol here. Any idea or super weapon will work on 2 or 3 targets before the Borg adapt. In the show, this only applied to drones, but we're willing to essentially let it be universal considering the scales we're dealing with. Importantly, any Exterminatus attack on a planet to destroy the whole thing in order to get rid of an infestation of Borg will still work just fine in any case. Until the planet is fully assimilated and planetary shield arrays are installed. Then you're fucked. And, of course, running speed is a common tactic in the 40k universe, from the shiny proud rams of Imperial ships to huge gaping maws of Tyranid biocruisers. We're not going to say that these sort of showings are automatically lethal, as Star Trek shields have resisted physical attacks from giant angry heads biting them to huge parasites glorping around the vessel. They consistently don't like it. More importantly, ships in 40k seem to average quite a bit bigger than ships in Star Trek, and that much mass can be difficult to resist even for good shields. These sort of assaults should be considered strong attacks, even against Borg vessels, as Starfleet vessels considered ramming as a last resort to potentially be effective against Borg, while warp rams are hypothesized to potentially work against them in some posited scenarios. They will be highly considered in the early scenario. To top this article off, we'd like to head off the question of chaos corruption. Unlike many of our contemporaries, we don't subscribe to the belief that chaos would be any conceptual threat to the Borg. Physically, sure, we imagine demons and the like would be just as threatening to the Borg as anything else we're going to be talking about, but we can't stress enough that the Borg are functionally beyond the reaches of chaos corruption. The way they perform as a species and the way they tackle problems and interact with other factions in their own setting has long convinced us that they would make no deals nor fall for any traps or temptation that chaos would set for them. All interactions with chaos are irrelevant. Any drones that did manage to be corrupted, hypothetically speaking, would be partitioned away and deleted just like any computer virus. They did it with the neurolytic pathogen at the end of Voyager, just before it almost destroyed them. Chances are they'd be even better at it now. Nobody is going to single-handedly convince the Borg again to destroy themselves. Any new idea only works once, and Insane Way already filled the quota for that idea. With that, we hope we whet your appetite for some Borg vs 40k action. Next time we hope to get our new friend in the community, Adam Skeptic, to work with us on some force totals, flight stats, and comparisons between the Borg and the 40k's transportation. We'll pick apart how their fleets and ships work, what they're made of, what they use to kill and keep from being killed, how they travel, and we'll discuss what their standard tactics are. Alongside all of that, we'll take a closer look at the scale of how 40k and Star Trek weaponry works to compare them a bit. Thanks so much for coming to our first Star Trek video. We've thought about this really seriously for a while, and all of the encouragement from all of our lovely patrons and fans has really led to this moment where we can expand into a third channel. So, if you like what you saw, remember to like, subscribe, and do all those other lovely things that help the channel. Go on down to our Linktree link in the description, as well as all the other links that we've got in the description to explore more and find out other places that we do stuff. And if you're an especially attractive and well-educated watcher, do seriously consider going on down to our Patreon via the Linktree link and pledging even just $1 a month to help support the cause and join the mighty, mighty ranks of Mike the Microphone, our #1 patron of all time, and Tolpanzer, our #1 watcher of all time. Thanks a bunch, everybody. Stay safe, stay inside, stay healthy, and of course remember to help each other. Bye.